What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. As you've seen by the title and thumbnail of this video, I am going to be betting on Jacqueline Buckley this week, and we'll get into the reasons why when we break down that fight in just a little bit. But before then, just want to let you guys know that there are spaces available to join my live betting group. As you can see from the profitability chart in the background, we make a profit almost every month live betting on the UFC. We actually make a profit on 75% of UFC Fight Night cards. Our win rate is a little bit lower on pay-per-view cards, but we perform extremely well on Fight Night cards, which means we're likely to perform pretty well this weekend for the UFC Fight Night Dawson Bobby Green card. Live betting on the UFC is my speciality. It always has been, and I think you'd really enjoy it. So if you watch every UFC event live, give it a try. Come to my website, mmabettingtips.com. You'll find a link for that in the description below. Scroll down to where it says in-play membership, and you can find out more information on this page. Consider signing up if you want to. If you don't like it, no problem. Get in touch. Get you a refund. But I think you will enjoy it, particularly if you watch every UFC event live. So now let's get into the first fight that I want to break down on this week's card, which is going to be, in fact, one of the most interesting fights on this card, and a fight that I have come very close to betting. I've gone back and forth in my mind a lot on this one, so please let me know what you think about this fight, because I'm very tempted to bet Bill Algeo in this one. But his last fight against TJ Brown scares me off him a little bit for reasons I'll get into in a moment. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Bill Algeo is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.77, which is going to be minus 130 for an implied probability of 57%. If we take a look at the odds on Alexander Hernandez, he's around an average of 2.05, which is going to be plus 105 for an implied probability of 49%. So Algeo is 34 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 73-inch reach, and Hernandez is 31 years old, 5'9", with a 72-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. Yes, Algeo will be longer and taller, but I feel that there are strengths and weaknesses to the body types of both guys here, with Algeo having that length, that ranginess, but Hernandez being, more powerful, more athletic, more physically imposing. So even though Algeo is a bit longer and taller, I don't think size is going to have a massive influence on this fight. In fact, I don't think it's going to have any influence at all. So I would expect this to, for the most part, be a stand-up fight, even though Alexander Hernandez has a base in wrestling, because his cardio isn't very good, and because he slows down so much when he does grapple. Typically speaking, you don't get a lot of grappling from Hernandez in his fights. Occasionally you grapple. He did try and grapple a fair bit against Quarantillo and it cost him, but for the most part, most of Hernandez's fights are stand-up fights. And of course, Bill Algeo has that sideways karate stance. He is primarily a striker. So we'll quickly cover how these two match up in terms of grappling, and then we'll get into striking, which is going to be where I think this fight's going to be decided. So in terms of grappling, there is no doubt that Hernandez is the more skilled wrestler out of the two. Algeo has pretty bad takedown defense. He just isn't a grappler. Ultimately he is a striker. So while Hernandez is the better wrestler, better offensive wrestling, better grappling control, there is a lot of danger in this fight for Hernandez if he were to grapple with Algeo, because what we've seen from Hernandez in all of his past fights, whether you look at the Quarantillo fight, whether you look at the Drew Dober fight, whether you look at the Donald Cerrone fight, whenever this guy grapples, he burns himself out very quickly. And so even though Alexander Hernandez is a significantly better grappler than Algeo from a technical point of view, what Algeo does really well on the ground is scramble like crazy. So even though his takedown defense is bad and he's not the best off his back, he's very difficult to hold down and control, because he's always trying to scramble, he's always trying to improve his position and work his way back up to his feet. Even when Algeo is very tired, he's still quite scrambly and difficult to control. So even though from a technical point of view Hernandez is a better grappler out of the two, if the fight were to go to the ground, I worry for Hernandez, because I feel Algeo might be able to out-scramble him wear him out and actually put Hernandez in a bad position. So I actually give Algeo the edge on the ground, which is one of the reasons why I lean towards Algeo in this fight, and I'm very tempted to bet him, because what we see a lot of the time from Hernandez, and we certainly saw this in the Quarantillo fight, is that when he does start to get hurt on the feet, when he does start to get outstruck, when he does start to get tired, he then goes back to his bread and butter, which is his grappling, which just kind of can accelerate his downfall in many ways, because when he's already feeling a bit tired and hurt on the feet, he then starts to grapple, which just accelerates the rate at which he gets tired. And I think cardio is something that we really need to talk a lot about in this matchup, because this is a fight where both guys definitely slow down a lot as fights wear on. I feel the real difference between these two in terms of cardio is that when Hernandez gets tired, and he kind of falls apart. Whereas when Algeo gets tired, if you look at Philly, he still keeps going, he still keeps pushing. Looking very tired, very sloppy. He's still always coming forward, he's still always pushing, he's still always working. He's very gamey, he's very tough, he's very scrappy. I think really differentiates these two. They both slow down a lot, but Algeo is way more effective when he's tired than Hernandez is. So that's another edge that I give to Algeo in this fight. And even as I'm going through this breakdown, I'm actually getting even more tempted to bet Algeo. And this happens quite often. You know, when you research a fight and you're very tempted to bet someone, your own mind talk can talk you out of that bet for specific things that you've seen in the research process. But then when you actually sit down to share your research in a format like this, where I'm going back over everything that I've seen in my head, and you lay it all out to try and explain most likely where a fight is going to go for someone else, you can start to kind of reprocess everything and like a bet a lot more than you initially did before breaking it down. And so I am getting quite tempted to bet Algeo here, because I'm feeling this way while recording this video. I'm not going to jump in and make a decision now. I would want to sit back, reflect about it, and might make my mind up without a camera pointing at me. But let me know what you think. Algeo's very tempting. I guess it's a nice segue into talking about the reasons that have scared me off a bet on Algeo, which predominantly stems from his striking. Now, the irony with this fight is that Hernandez is primarily a grappler with a base in wrestling, and Algeo is primarily a striker with a base in striking. But I actually think Algeo can cause Hernandez more problems on the ground than Hernandez can cause Algeo. And I think Hernandez can cause Algeo more problems when it comes to striking than Algeo can cause Hernandez, which is a total paradox that you very rarely see in the UFC, right? If a guy is a specialist fighting another specialist, you would expect him to have an edge in his area of speciality. That isn't the case here, in my opinion, or at least not early in the fight. And so what we know about Algeo is that he's one of these guys that has a karate style, fights with his hands down low, chin up high, and he's very scrappy. He likes to mix it up. He fights at a high pace. He throws a high volume of strikes. He likes to engage. He likes to exchange. He likes to throw down. And the problem with that style for Algeo is that he doesn't really have the striking defense to back it up. So when you're really aggressive and you're trying to turn fights into these crazy wars, it's always risky, but it's extra risky when you can't really defend yourself from counters or big power strikes in the exchanges that you initiate. And so Algeo is a guy that takes a lot of damage, eats a lot of clean hard shots, and is just very, very poor defensively. And so when you are fighting like Algeo against volume strikers, you can get away with it more than you can against guys like Alexander Hernandez. Now, don't get me wrong, Algeo has fought dangerous guys on the feet. Back But Alexander Hernandez has got that true legit one-shot knockout power. He's very fast. He's very technical. And one of the reasons why Hernandez slows down pretty bad in all of his fights is that he won't take a backward step. So he's not interested in circling away and not engaging and pacing himself. If you take the fight to him, he'll stand his ground, plant his feet and fire back. And that might not be a good thing for Algeo, because out of the two, Hernandez is a lot more dangerous, hits a lot harder, is a lot better defensively. And so early in this fight, I think Hernandez is going to do really well. I think he's going to light Algeo up. I think he's going to inflict a lot of damage. I think he's going to hurt Algeo pretty bad. And I wouldn't even rule out him being able to knock Algeo out. I know Algeo's tough as nails. He's got a great chin. He hasn't been KO'd since he came into the UFC. Has he ever been KO'd, actually? Should we check? I know he hasn't been KO'd in the UFC. He has never been KO'd, which is actually incredibly surprising when you look at how much damage he takes and how bad he is defensively. I mean, even if you look at him after just the first round against TJ Brown, bearing in mind TJ Brown's predominantly a wrestler, I mean, he literally looked like he'd been in a car crash. He took so much damage. So it's very surprising to me how Algeo hasn't been knocked out. But he's an absolute dog, right? He's tough as nails. It's one of the reasons why we love him. One of the reasons why I'm thinking about betting on him. There's absolutely no quitting him. And in a war of attrition, where both guys are going to slow down, I do favour Algeo for sure. But I do think Algeo is going to struggle extremely badly early. I think he's going to take a lot of damage. I think he's going to get outstruck. And so this is one of those fights where, for me, the way I see it going is I think Hernandez is going to do really well in the first round. I just think he'll be too technical, and the shots he'll be landing will be too powerful, too impactful for Algeo. I think Hernandez is going to have a great round one. It might be a crazy back and forth war where both guys have their moments, but I think Hernandez is going to be the guy landing the harder, more impactful shots. I think he's going to be hurting Algeo more. I'm reasonably confident Algeo is going to win round 3. I expect both guys to be absolutely gassed out of their mind in round 3. I expect them both to be looking very tired. But remember what I said earlier in the breakdown. When both guys get tired, Algeo is way more effective than Hernandez is. So I think Hernandez is going to take round 1. Algeo is going to take round 3. The question for me is whether Hernandez has got enough in the tank to win round 2 decisively and then stay alive in round 3. Because Hernandez is a tough guy, right? The question for me is, will this fight go like the Quarantillo fight, where Hernandez has a ton of success in round 1, Quarantillo weathers the early storm, drags Hernandez into round 2, where momentum kind of swings in Quarantillo's favour? Is that going to happen? Or is what we saw in the Jim Miller fight going to happen, where Hernandez is still somewhat capable of performing in the second half of the fight because of how well he did early and how hard Miller found it to get inside and really make Hernandez work and cause him a problem? My lean is that this goes more like the Quarantillo fight. But Algeo takes so much damage and his defense is so bad that I could absolutely see Hernandez winning these first 2 rounds. Especially because with a guy like Algeo, he really has no room for error. Like, say for example Hernandez wins round 1 comfortably like we expect him to, and then even if he's getting a little bit tired in round 2 and slightly outworked, with how bad Algeo is defensively, Hernandez could still steal round 1 with a knockdown or something like that. So it's a tricky one, man. I lean towards Algeo for sure, but the amount of damage he took against TJ Brown is a problem for me because I think Alexander Hernandez is so much better than TJ Brown. So it's a tricky one. It's a very, very tricky one. I'd be keen to know what you think. So let me know, man. Let me know. Let's take a little look at the over-under and the props on this one. So I'm expecting the over-under to be in the even money odds range. It is. Makes perfect sense. I wouldn't touch the over-under on this one. Because I could see it being a 3-round war of attrition that goes the distance, or, you know, a knockdown drag-out brawl where someone gasses out and gets finished because they're too tired to defend themselves, or, you know, Hernandez just kind of flash KOs. But Algeo, I could see that happening. So my lean is more on this fight not to go to a decision because of how aggressive both guys are. The fact they do both slow down, I think at some point one of these guys isn't going to be able to continue. But yeah, it's 50-50. I don't have a strong feeling either way on it. In terms of the prop bets on this one, I would go with... Algeo to win by knockout or TKO at 9.0 plus 800 is pretty good. Because I think it could get to the point where Hernandez adrenaline dumps gases and Algeo gets a stoppage with strikes. Maybe not necessarily with a big knockout, but maybe ground and pound stoppage, something like that. Which would come under a TKO. These odds are shit. 5.5 plus 450. These odds are pretty good. I don't like props, I won't be betting it myself, but 9.0 plus 800, pretty generous on that. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below and subscribe if you haven't already. What main event have we got next week? Is there an interesting main event coming up next week? Let's take a look. It's not bad. Yusuf Barboza. It's not bad. It's not bad. It's not bad. Anyway, subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video. And now let's get into this next breakdown, which is going to be Rick Glenn versus Drew Dober. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Drew Dober is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.21, which is going to be minus 476 for an implied probability of 83%. If we take a look at the odds on Rick Glenn, he's around an average of 4.50, which is going to be plus 350 for an implied probability of 22%. So, Rick Glenn, 34 years old, 6 foot tall with a 70.5-inch reach. And Drew Dober is 34 years old, 5 foot 8 with a 70-inch reach. So, both guys the same age, roughly the same size. Again, you know, difference in body type. Rick Glenn, long and tall. Dober, small, muscular and compact. But I wouldn't expect size to have an influence in this matchup because they both have strengths and weaknesses with their body types. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, both guys are primarily strikers. Rick Glenn, trained at Rufus Sport for a majority of his career, which is obviously a predominantly striking-based gym. And we know that Drew Dober has got a style very much steeped in Muay Thai. If the fight stays standing, I would expect Drew Dober to do pretty well. Even though, like Bill Algeo, he's not the best defensively and he tends to take a ton of damage, just like Bill Algeo, he's tougher than a fucking coffin nail. Has got an amazing chin. Very game, very scrappy. And even though it looks like he's been in a car crash in pretty much all of his fights, he can take a shot and he doesn't mind taking a shot to give a shot. If the fight stays standing, Drew Dober is going to be by far the more technical striker. He's going to be faster. He's going to hit harder. And I really feel he's probably going to light Glenn up. Now, Glenn, will likely have some success in this fight on the feet because of how bad Dober is defensively. But Glenn is also pretty bad defensively. He's a lot slower than Dober and he's not as technical either. So from the southpaw stance, I just think Dober's going to be lighting him up on the feet. Way too technical for him. Landing the harder, more impactful shots. And we know Dober's also a cardio machine who can go hard for 3 rounds. And that will be useful in this fight because Glenn is also well known for having amazing cardio. Now, the one area where Glenn will have a fairly big advantage in this fight is on the ground. We know that Dober's takedown offense is pretty bad. His ground game is pretty bad. And we know that for the most part, whenever anyone tries to use a grappling heavy game plan against Dober, they tend to have a decent amount of success. Now, Glenn's MMA grappling isn't amazing, but how, like he showed in the Grant Dawson fight, it's certainly serviceable. And if Glenn were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, it still wouldn't be easy for him because, Dober isn't like super easy to take down or hold down for a guy with a level of MMA grappling that Glenn has. But I do see Glenn making this a pretty competitive fight if he grapples, because, like I say, he's got the cardio to grapple hard for 3 rounds if he wants to. And so, if this fight stays standing, Glenn gets smoked. But I think he can make it very interesting if he comes in with a grappling heavy game plan. The problem with Glenn is that he's one of these stubborn strikers that very rarely does come in with a grappling heavy game plan. But I hope he does this weekend, because if he does, it could be a very, very interesting fight. What does this mean from a betting point of view? Well, for me, it means that Drew Dober is completely unplayable. When you look at a guy in this odds range, in order to bet a guy in this odds range, they have to have virtually no way to lose and extremely large advantages over their opponent everywhere. That simply isn't the case here. We know Dober's very bad defensively. There's always a chance he could get caught with something on the feet. And we also know his takedown offense and ground game is very bad. We know Glenn will have an advantage there. So Dober at these odds, totally unplayable. So the question then becomes, is Rick Glenn worth a bet? And for me, it's a tricky one, because Glenn is not the type of fighter that I like to bet. I don't want to go into too much detail on my pre-fight betting strategy and how we've performed in recent times, but obviously we're performing extremely well on pre-fight bets. We'll get into more of that in the Jacqueline Buckley breakdown in a bit. For me, I like to bet on fighters who have a really, really, really good chance of winning. And that's how we maintain, a really high win rate, where you see the stretch of results here. Whenever you bet on a fighter like Rick Glenn, you are putting your money in a lot of danger, because, ultimately both these guys are strikers. They like to stand and bang. They like to stand and strike. Can Rick Glenn win? Yes. But in order for him to win, it basically revolves around him stepping outside of his comfort zone and fighting with a game plan and strategy that he often doesn't fight with, which is something that fighters, especially like veterans like Glenn, who are stubborn and stuck in their ways, don't typically like to do. So we can research this fight and identify that if Glenn grapples in this matchup, he's likely to do very well. But I wouldn't bet on him knowing that or doing that himself, because quite often fighters are very stubborn and will not take the easiest path to victory. And if you are to bet on Glenn this weekend, you're kind of betting on him fighting with a style and strategy that he never really fights with, which usually doesn't work out too well in the world of betting on the UFC. So for me, I would pass on this one. But if you like to hunt dogs, if you like to gamble, if you want to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I don't think Glenn's a terrible bet. It probably is a little bit of value there. It just doesn't go along with my particular style of fight, particular style of UFC betting. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a moment with the Alex Morono, Jacqueline Buckley breakdown. So, if we take a look at the over-under on this fight, the over 1.5 rounds is pretty tempting. It's in the even money odds range. The reason why it's tempting is because both these guys are tough as nails and they've both got amazing cardio. The reason why I'm probably going to stay away from it, I haven't made my mind up yet, but the reason why I'm more than likely not going to bet the over-under on this one is because when you've got two guys like this that are tough, that are scrappy, that will go toe-to-toe, that will get into big exchanges, that will not want to take a backward step. When you get two guys like that also have bad striking defense, you know that there's no way that these two boys are going to play nice on Saturday night. There's no way there's going to be a friendly point fighting contest in the middle of the octagon where the minutes on the fight clock are going to tick down. You know Dober is going to come forward, take control of the center of the octagon, pressure Glenn and force him to exchange from the first second to the last. And whenever you've got a fight like that where one of the guys is initiating relentless violence, it's very dangerous to bet the over, because it only takes one shot to end a fight. And when you've got two guys that like to throw down and are bad defensively, even though they're very tough and both these guys have got pretty good chins, it only takes one shot and your bet is dead in the water. So I don't like to put my money in that situation. For that reason, I'll probably be passing, but because of how tough both these guys are, the over 1.5 rounds is pretty tempting. Especially if Glenn were to use a grappling heavy game plan, because obviously then you wouldn't have these two guys playing rock'em sock'em robots trying to kill each other on the feet. In terms of the prop bets on this one, in terms of the prop bets, do you know what? Dober by decision is interesting to me. Dober by decision is interesting to me at 4.50 plus 350. Only because if you look at Rick Glenn's record, right? In the last couple of years, some of his fights have ended quickly. But before that, he was an absolute decisionator. The guy's tough as nails, great cardio, great chin, can take a shot. Dober, pretty much exactly the same. Now, I know Dober fights do a lot more decisions. I know a lot more of Dober's fights end inside the distance. But Glenn is a tough fucker. And if Glenn does use grappling in this fight, probability of the fight going into a decision far more likely. I don't like props. I won't be betting it myself. But if you want to bet a little bit of money on this fight to make watching it more interesting, that might be one to look at. But it will be a war, and your money will be in danger because both these guys will be trying to kill each other. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Alex Morono against Joaquin Buckley. And I just want to start off by just giving ourselves a bit of a pat on the back, boys, because we are doing absolutely phenomenally well on pre-fight betting, to the extent that we've only had 2 losing months on pre-fight bets in the whole of 2023. We've done absolutely incredibly well. And I think it's important for us to take a moment to just appreciate all the hard work we've put in, analysing our results and making adjustments to improve. I think it's just nice to just acknowledge the hard work we've put in, because it's not easy what we do. It's very stressful. It comes with crippling stress, crippling performance anxiety. I'm stressed 24/7, 365 days a year. So when you see changes you implement with the goal of improving performance, improve performance over a period of time, it's just nice. It is nice because it shows hard work pays off. So if we look at our profitability chart, we've got this nice run up here, this nice profit, really nice profit on this run here. Then we go through this period where we just float around break even for a while. And during this time, it was very frustrating because we'd have these nice runs up and then we'd have these big dips, and then these nice runs up and then these big dips. And around about this time here, back in April 2022, I just got frustrated because it had gone through this cycle where we'd have these nice winning runs and then we'd give it all back, and these nice winning runs and we'd give it all back, and it wasn't something I'd experienced in recent times. And so I had enough, and I realised something that needed to change. So what I did was go through all of our bets over this period of time, and I started to look for trends on what kind of bets were consistently performing very well for us and what kind of bets were consistently costing us money. And I found that there were certain types of bets that we would lose on relatively frequently, and certain types of bets that we appeared to have a huge edge on and would win very, very often. And so after I'd done that analysis back in the summer of 2022, I decided to just stop betting all the kind of bets that we hadn't performed well on in the previous 12 months and double and triple down on all the bets that we did perform well on. And if we zoom in to our performance, our profitability chart since I made those adjustments, you can see that our results have been absolutely brilliant, to put it mildly. If we look at this profitability chart over the last year, we have done absolutely phenomenally well. But my screen capture software is giving me some problems, so just bear with me. There we go. So if we zoom in on this, so when you look at this profitability chart here, not that impressive, right? Kind of just looks like we're going break even over a long period of time. But when you zoom in to the period of time after I made the adjustments to my pre-fight betting strategy back in the summer, you can just see that we've got just a really nice steady uptrend, and there's no doubt that we're making great progress. And like I say, if you look at our results from 2023, here is the start of 2023 here. We've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023. I think February was a losing month, and so was June. Outside of that, made a profit every month, which is absolutely brilliant. So it's just important to look at this profitability chart and understand that it's working. And I want to show you this because it's one of those things where the strategy that I'm currently using is very boring. I understand I don't place many bets. It also requires passing on a lot of fights that I'm very tempted to bet on. Bill Algeo is a really good example. This week I really want to bet Bill Algeo. I think he's a good value bet. I think he's very likely to get it done. The problem is, when I look back at the analysis that I did on my past performance, bets on guys like Bill Algeo or bets on guys like Rick Glenn were the exact kind of bets that were causing us to just float around break even for a long period of time, where we'd have this category of bet that we performed really well on and we would make money like 65-70% of the time on this specific type of bet, but then we would give it back 40-50% of the time on this other category of bet, which meant we'd win a bit and then give it back, and then win a bit and then give it back, and then win a bit and then get it back. Once we eliminate those Bill Algeo type bets, you can see that's when we can produce this nice steady uptrend. And so I wanted to show you this because I know my betting strategy is very boring, it's very conservative. If you watch my content, if you're a member of my Discord community, you want lots of bets, you want to mix it up, you want to place 10-15 bets, you want to place bets on every fight. And I know the fact that sometimes I can go 2-3 weeks without placing a single pre-fight bet is very frustrating for many of you. But I'm at the stage in my life where I'm kind of getting to the stage where I've really nailed down like all aspects of my betting. I feel like this strategy is pretty rock solid for pre-fight betting. I think I can continue to use this strategy and produce really good percentage gains every year for the rest of my life. UFC live betting is an absolute cash cow for us. We make profits most months. And football betting is something that, I'm confident that I'm going to be able to make crazy profits on in the future. I'm very early in my football betting career, my football betting life cycle, but things are going well, considering we're betting the highest liquidity sport in the world. So when you look at the way we bet at the moment from maybe like an investment point of view and diversification, what I'm looking at doing, or what I have been doing over the last year, is looking more at my betting holistically instead of individually. So for example, in the past, going back 2 years prior to that, it would be very difficult for me to not place a pre-fight bet on the UFC for 2 or 3 weeks. I'd start to get that itchy trigger finger and I'd force a bet. And similarly, it would be very difficult for me to pass on an entire UFC event without placing a live bet, because again, you'd get that itchy trigger finger and force a bet. And then when I would start betting on football, I couldn't go 2, 3, 4 days without placing a bet on football, because there's so many games. If you're watching 8, 9, 10 hours of football a day, to not place a single bet in 2, 3, 4 days is very difficult. Your eyes, your brain will start to see things that are not there. You'll force bets. It's very difficult to stay on track. And so in the past, this is why we've seen periods of up and down, periods of break even, whereas now, instead of looking at each individual aspect of my main betting individually, whereas in the past I would look at pre-fight bets, UFC live bets, football individually, now I'm looking at them holistically in terms of, if I don't have a bet on pre-fight bets for 3-4 weeks, doesn't really matter, because I might have had 5 football bets last week and 2 UFC live bets. If I don't have a particularly good night live bet in the UFC and we struggle to make money, or we struggle to find any bets, well, it might not matter, because maybe Buckley gets a job done for us on pre-fight bets. If Saturday isn't a particularly good for pre-fight, if Saturday's not a particularly good job for football betting, well, maybe it won't matter, because we'll do well on UFC live betting and Buckley will get the job done for us in pre-fight betting. So guess what I'm trying to say is I'm entering like a new phase in my gambling career where I am just looking at things holistically, taking a much more sniper approach, and I'm only putting my money in situations these days where I overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour. And when we've only got 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 UFC fights to bet every week, with thousands of eyeballs on these fights, it's going to be very difficult to find super strong positions for us to find our money, because odds are very efficient and they will correct themselves. But we have learned over the years, if we're very, very patient, the universe will present us with very good opportunities that enable us to produce a nice, steady, consistent uptrend, nice, steady, consistent profits such as this. And what I really like about this new approach to pre-fight betting is that it enables me to be way more aggressive with my bets. We know that the max bet limits on pre-fight bets are way higher than they are on UFC live bets. And in the past, I would be really reluctant to go big on pre-fight bets and bet a lot of money on pre-fight bets, because what I didn't want to be was in a situation where I know I make money almost every month in UFC live betting, but I know in the past the pre-fight bets have been very swingy, where we can win a lot and then give it all back, and then win a lot and then give it all back. I was always very cautious about finding myself in a position where we may be doing great on, you know, UFC live bets. We might make money every month for 3, 4, 5 months in a row on UFC live bets, but then it could easily get, you know, all wiped out in a month if we have really, you know, one bad month on pre-fight betting, which historically is what would have happened quite often. What I really like about this new approach is that now I can have way more confidence to take advantage of the larger max bet limits and bet bigger and more aggressively on pre-fight bets, bet way more money on pre-fight bets, because I know our win rate is very high, and I know that we are consistently overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour and putting our money in strong positions. So that's just me. That's where I'm at in life at the moment with betting. And yeah, just nice to think out loud. I hope you found that useful. You probably didn't. I was just rambling some bollocks. But anyway, that's the way it is, man. That's how I'm feeling. So now it's time for us to talk about the reasons why I do think Jacqueline Buckley is one of those bets that does fit my very strict criteria of being a fighter that ticks almost every box and is a very strong position for us to put our money. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that Alex Morono is the underdog at average odds of around 2.40, which is going to be plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. We take a look at the odds on Jacqueline Buckley. We can see that he's around an average of about 1.59, which is going to be minus 169 for an implied probability of 63%. So I've already said that I think Jacqueline Buckley is a pretty good bet this weekend. And when I am working out whether or not a fighter is a good bet, what I'm really looking for is opportunities to overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour, where I look at the realistic path to victory for both fighters, and I look at the ways in which both guys could lose. And if ever I find the situation where you get an opportunity to bet on someone at reasonably good odds that don't really have many ways in which they could lose, that does pique my interest. And I do think Buckley, with the way he matches up stylistically with Morono, does fit the profile of a fighter who has a lot of ways to win and not that many ways to lose. And we'll talk about the reasons why in the breakdown as we go through how they match up from a striking and grappling point of view. Let's start off by taking a look at the tail of the tape. We can see that Morono, 33 years old, 5'11", with a 72-inch reach. Jacqueline Buckley, 29 years old, 5'10", with a 76-inch reach. So we've got a nice 4-inch reach advantage for Buckley. To be honest with you, he doesn't do a particularly good job of using his length and reach, but maybe now that he's fighting guys of a similar size to him in a welterweight division, as opposed to being always undersized in the middleweight division, perhaps he will start to learn how to use his size and length a little bit better in the welterweight division, because remember, he's only 29 years old. He's going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. So the reason why I like Buckley a lot in this fight is because what we've got here is two guys that are primarily strikers. They both like to stand and strike. It's what they do. But when you look at how they match up, realistically, Morono's only path to victory in this fight is by flash KO, which isn't that likely, considering Morono's not a big power puncher, and Buckley's got a pretty good chin. He's pretty durable, pretty good defensively. You know, we've seen Morono hurt guys on the feet who are like old, beat up. You know, guys like Santiago Ponzinibbio, for example. But when you look at Morono's fights before that, when he's been facing guys who were, you know, younger, in their prime, he's not that dangerous on the feet. He's a bit of a decisionator. All the guys that he hurts on the feet, you know, like when he's wobbled Ponzinibbio, or, you know, he's knocked out Donald Cerrone, these are all guys that tend to be way past their prime. And obviously Joaquin Buckley doesn't fit into that category of fighter. He's 29 years old. He's making big improvements from fight to fight, and he's, you know, he's a young, hungry bull. So when Morono isn't fighting these beat-up old veterans, he doesn't look that dangerous on the feet. He's more of a volume striker. Now, that doesn't mean Morono can't knock Buckley out. We've seen Buckley knocked out, wobbled, dropped in the past. Curtis knocked him out. You know, we saw Kevin Holland knock him out. You know, De Chirico knock him out, right? Buckley's human, only takes one shot. Maybe Morono catches him with something. But to be fair to Buckley, he moves well. He's good defensively. He can take a shot. And Morono, more of a volume striker. So there's only really, in my opinion, two like realistic paths to victory for Morono. One's by flash KO, and we've already established that isn't that likely. The second is that he could outstrike Buckley. He could outpoint Buckley and win a decision in, you know, what would be, I would imagine, a competitive stand-up fight. Now, can Morono outstrike Buckley? He absolutely can. I like Morono's striking. He's awkward. He moves well. Throws a decent volume of strikes. But I would be really surprised if Morono were to dominate this fight on the feet. I could see Morono outstriking Buckley and winning a decision for sure. But can Morono dominate Buckley on the feet? Extremely unlikely. I think if this fight did stay standing and Morono were to outstrike Buckley, I think at best Morono could hope for would be like scraping by a really close competitive decision. I don't see any realistic way in which Morono would just outclass Buckley, outstrike him on the feet, beat the brakes off him, and make the matchup look really comfortable. So we've spoken about two paths to victory for Morono, right? Flash knockout, outstriking Buckley. Flash knockout's pretty unlikely. And, you know, he could outstrike Buckley, but it's not like he's going to dominate Buckley on the feet. At best, the best Morono can hope for is that it's competitive and he scrapes a close decision win. So why do I like Joaquin Buckley in this fight? And why do I feel that when you bet him, you're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in your favour? Well, when we go through every realistic area in where this fight could take place, not only do I feel that Buckley has a slight edge, but I also feel he has way more paths to victory. So if we first go through Morono's path to victory, and we, you know, look to counter that with Buckley's probabilities of winning in the same way. Morono's a tough guy. He's got a great chin as well. But in my opinion, Buckley is a far more dangerous striker than Alex Morono. You know, Buckley's athletic. He throws a more diverse range of attacks. He's got big power. He's explosive. I feel Buckley's a way more dangerous striker than Morono. And while, you know, if you look at Buckley's record, he doesn't have tons of wins on his record by knockout. You know, he's got the odd win here and there by knockout. But, you know, I do get that Buckley doesn't have tons and tons and tons of wins on his record by knockout, right? There's a few. But, you know, Buckley isn't kind of like a devastating power puncher, okay? He was earlier in his career when, you know, he would come out the gate very aggressive, try and kill everyone in round one. But since then, you know, he's really become a lot more conservative and strategic in how he performs. He's not as reckless as he used to be. But personally, when you look at Morono's record, absolute decisionator. When you look at Buckley's record, you know, a lot more wins by finish. And it's worth bearing in mind that Buckley has finished far bigger guys than Morono, right? So Buckley was getting finishes in the middleweight division. Morono is a relatively small welterweight at only 5'11". So Buckley should be really powerful, really athletic, physically imposing, even more dangerous in the welterweight division now that he starts to find his feet in the division. So both guys can win by flash knockout, but I feel it's way more likely Buckley would knock Morono out than Morono would knock Buckley out. So straight away, when we're trying to weigh up the risk to reward ratio with betting Buckley kind of, wins the debate of who's more likely to win by knockout, right? For me, it's Buckley. Then if we look at the potential for Morono outstriking Buckley over 3 rounds, this is one of those fights where I don't feel either guy has a massive edge when it comes to striking. For me, Morono's footwork and movement is a bit better and he throws a higher volume of strikes. But for me, Buckley throws a more diverse range of strikes. He's more explosive. He hits harder. He's more accurate. I think he's faster than Morono as well. And I think he's better defensively than Morono. Morono has a habit of getting dinged a lot, caught cold on the feet. Whereas Buckley's got a tighter guard, reads his opponents better. It's not easy to land clean and hard on Buckley. When we've seen Buckley hurt in the past in situations where he's been knocked out, for example, against Chris Curtis, it tends to be when he bites down on the mouthpiece, gets really aggressive, really reckless, just decides to play rock'em sock'em robots and gets caught. But at distance, Buckley's actually pretty good defensively. So while Morono will likely land a higher volume of strikes than Buckley, Buckley is just a more technical striker. He hits harder, he's faster, covers distance quicker, he's more elusive. For me, I give Buckley the slight edge in striking as well. Might not be able to match Morono's volume, but he does everything else better than Morono. And what's important about that is obviously if you're a guy like Morono that just kind of chips away at your opponent, racks up volume, that kind of volume can easily be negated with big power combinations. From a guy like Buckley that can land cleaner, harder, do more damage, really grab the attention of the judges. So Morono has a couple paths to victory, but I feel Buckley has the exact same path to victory that Morono does, and it's actually more likely that Buckley executes those paths to victory and comes out on top, right? Buckley's more dangerous, more likely to knock Morono out. Buckley the more skilled striker in my opinion. But then, when we consider grappling, we also have to give Buckley a pretty big advantage there, right? Now, Buckley might be pretty green on the ground. Buckley's not the most skilled grappler. We know Alex Morono is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But Morono's problem is that he does have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And he wants to be on the ground attacking with submissions. Right? We saw him submit Tim Means with a guillotine. Morono's one of these guys that doesn't even really try to stuff takedowns. He just gives takedowns up and then starts attacking with submissions off his back. But Alex Morono's problem is that he tends to give up takedowns very easily and then just spends way too long on his back hunting for long shot submissions. This is really notable to me because what we've seen from Buckley in recent years is that he's really started to evolve as a fighter. He's starting to mix things up way more than he did when he first came into the UFC, right? In his first few performances, he would just come out the gate very aggressive, trying to kill everyone in round one, loading up on these big wing and power shots, trying to knock everyone out in the first round. After a couple of losses, we've seen him fight way smarter, way more strategically, where now he picks his shots, he paces himself better, he's not as reckless, and he also mixes up his striking and grappling where, he'll look to steal rounds with takedowns, he'll look to use his physicality and athleticism to wear guys down and out-grapple, and we saw him do this with Alhassan. And so, this is one of those fights where I don't think it's going to be easy for Buckley, but when you go through Morono's path to victory, I feel Buckley also has those paths to victory, but he's more likely to win via those paths to victory. And on top of that, Buckley has more ways to win, other ways to win that Morono doesn't have. For example, Morono can't out-grapple Buckley, as an example. Buckley's just too strong, too good of an MMA grappler. And so, both guys have got reasonably good cardio. Both can go hard for 3 rounds. They're both tough. They're both durable. For me, this is just one of those fights where I just don't see many past the victory for Morono outside of something crazy happening like a flash KO or Buckley really underperforming and just not really letting it go. So I think Buckley's a good bet this weekend, and I will be betting him. And I think he's going to do pretty well against Morono. It's a tough fight, but I feel it's a good stylistic matchup for Buckley, especially if he comes in with a game plan to really mix things up and grapple as well as strike. So let me know what you guys think. But Buckley is the best position I've seen to bet in a while. So I will be betting Mr. Buckley this weekend. Hopefully he comes through for me. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, if we take a look at the odds, we can see that the over-under, or the bookies are very much feeling like this one is not likely to go the distance. I disagree. I actually think it's quite likely to go the distance. We've seen Buckley start a lot slower in recent years. Both guys are quite tough. Both guys are quite durable. And so I will be betting the over 1.5 rounds on this fight. I think it's reasonably likely it goes deep, and reasonably likely it even goes to a decision. I do think there's quite a good chance Buckley will look to pace himself and pick his shots and, you know, be a little bit more tactical on the feet and look to steal rounds with takedowns. Sorry, I've got to even mention, I haven't even mentioned in terms of how these two match up stylistically when it comes to striking. So in terms of how they match up, what we know from Morono is that he's going to bounce around really light on his feet, stay on the outside, and look to just win boxing exchanges. Doesn't throw a whole lot of kicks. Every once in a while he throws kicks, but for the most part Morono is more of a puncher. Buckley is going to try and stay all the way outside the range where he can be hit, or all the way inside, throwing blitz and attacks at Morono or looking for takedowns. Buckley's got really good boxing combinations, hits very hard, and he's very good at getting in and out, very good at reading his opponent. So it won't be easy for Morono to land clean on Buckley in this fight, because Buckley does have the speed advantage, and when he comes in and blitzes, he's very good at getting in and out before before you're able to catch him. And so yeah, I do quite like the over 1.5 rounds on this fight as well. In terms of the props, Buckley by decision is a prop I quite like as well. 6.5 plus 550. I would go for that. I think that's reasonably likely to win. I don't bet props, so I'm not going to be betting that myself. I would prefer to just put more money on the over or more money on Buckley straight. But I do think that this is a pretty decent prop if you're someone that likes to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching them more interesting. So please let me know what you think. Are you going to be betting Buckley this weekend? Are you going to be betting Morono? Do you think I'm a fool? Do you think I'm a crazy person? Let me know what you think. I would really appreciate your feedback. And yeah, I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Abdulrazak Alhassan against Joe Pyfer. So if you start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Pyfer, can't find his odds, we just do Control F. Wow, where has he gone? Is this fight been cancelled? Because the odds aren't appearing. Very strange, very, very strange. Has this fight been cancelled? Okay, here they are. I must have been spelling his name wrong, I do apologise, and they were in a different box compared to the odds of the rest of this card. Very strange. Anyway, we crack on. So Joe Pyfer, pretty big favourite, average odds of around 1.23, which is going to be minus 435 for an implied probability of 81%. Take a look at the odds on Alhassan. He's around an average of 4.40, which is going to be plus 340 for an implied probability of 23%. Abdulrazak Alhassan is 38 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach, and Joe Pyfer, 27 years old, 6'2", with a 75-inch reach. So we can see, first of all, there's a big age gap in this fight. Pyfer is 11 years younger, and we know statistically that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there is an 11-year age gap in a fight. So already statistically that gives Pyfer a pretty big advantage, and you are betting against a very powerful trend if you bet on Abdulrazak Alhassan this weekend. Now, in terms of Pyfer, he also has another X factor on his side that might not be massively obvious on the tail of the tape, but I think when we look at the weigh-ins, the ceremonial weigh-ins on Friday night, I think this could be one of those matchups where there is an enormous size difference. At 5'10", Alhassan's pretty small for a middleweight, and while there's only a 2-inch difference in reach on paper, I do think this could be one of those situations where Pyfer towers over Alhassan, and there will be a big size difference in this one. So can't be sure until we see the ceremonial weigh-ins on Friday, but I do think Pyfer will have a pretty major size advantage over Alhassan. We'll have to wait and see, but I think that is what we're going to get. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, whenever you fight a guy like Alhassan, it's always a dangerous fight, no matter what advantages you've got over him. You know, you've really got to be careful because Alhassan is very aggressive, he hits very hard, and he's also one of these guys that is quite reckless. He'll go out on his shield. You know, we saw him in an absolute war against Claudio Ribeiro. He's got absolutely no problem standing in the pocket and just winging bombs. And when you're as dangerous as Alhassan, as powerful, as fast, it only takes one shot to land, and it can be over. So it's a dangerous fight for Pyfer, and you know, by far the most dangerous fight of his career. Guys like Gerald Meerschaert, Alan Amadovsky, they don't pose that true, legit one-shot knockout power like Alhassan does. So while this is a good stylistic matchup for Pyfer, because he's a lot younger, he's a lot bigger, he's a lot faster, he's a lot more technical, he's got a better cardio, better gas tank. There's danger in this fight for Pyfer, and it's a good test for him. So before we get into talking about how they match up in terms of striking and grappling, we have also got to mention Alhassan's cardio. Now, he does have a tendency to slow down a lot as fights wear on. He's got a lot better at pacing himself in recent years, but he is still a fighter that tends to gas out pretty much every fight that goes past round 1. Now, that should give Pyfer an advantage, but it is worth noting that there's not tons of footage available on Pyfer going past round 1, so we don't know what his cardio is like. You can see these fights that went to a decision were actually grappling contests. So in MMA, this fight ended quick, this fight ended quick, so did this, so did this, so did this, so did this, so did this. In fact, you have to go all the way back to 2018, 5 years ago, to see the last time Pyfer went to a decision. So Pyfer should have the cardio edge, but we can't be totally sure because there's a lack of footage on him going deep in fights. Now, in terms of how they match up from a stylistic point of view, one area where Pyfer is going to have an enormous advantage over Alhassan is on the ground. Even though Alhassan has got a base in judo, his takedown defense is extremely bad, and he's also one of these guys that if you put him on his back, he's very, very weak off his back. So if Pyfer were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, we know he's a good MMA grappler, we know he's a good offensive wrestler, we know he's got a heavy top game, good grappling control. If Pyfer were to use a grappling heavy game plan here, he would dominate Alhassan. It would be an easy night's work for him, an easy fight. He would do really, really well. I don't see this being a contest. But we know Pyfer likes to mix things up, and you know, every fight starts standing. We know Pyfer likes to stand and strike. And on the feet, you know, Pyfer uses his length well. He hits very hard, very technical, he's very accurate. But you need to be really careful with a guy like Alhassan. He can cover distance very quickly, deliver major, major power. So Pyfer will have the advantage standing up and on the ground. Pyfer throws a higher volume of strikes. He's bigger, he fights longer. I wouldn't necessarily say he's more technical than Alhassan early, but certainly he will be as the fight wears on. Alhassan starts to slow and get sloppy. But for me, Pyfer really should use his grappling in this fight, and if he does, it should be an easy night's work. So what does all that stuff mean from a betting point of view? Well, with how dangerous Alhassan is, there's just no upside in betting on Pyfer in this odds range. Pyfer will more than likely win, especially if he uses a grappling heavy game plan, but the odds are absolutely terrible, and Pyfer's advantages are very much baked into his odds here. Alhassan is not at all tempting for me though as a bet, because he's older than Pyfer, he's smaller than Pyfer, and his cardio is very bad, with how bad he is on the ground as well. It's a great stylistic matchup for Pyfer, and if he can just avoid getting flash knocked out, should win this very comfortably. So this fight's an easy pass. This fight's an easy pass. Easy pass. So in terms of the over-under on this one, fight doesn't go to decision. Obviously steep favourite odds because, well, both guys very rarely go to a decision. You can see, you know, lots of first round finishes, lots of early finishes for Alhassan, and we already spoke about Pyfer barely ever go into a decision. So very likely this fight ends inside the distance. The odds reflect that. In terms of the over-under on the 1.5 rounds, I I don't have a strong opinion on it. Obviously, it's a lot more likely the fight ends under 1.5 rounds because, you know, Alhassan tends to gas. Both guys are dangerous. Both guys have got true legit knockout power. But I don't love the odds. I would pass on the over-under on this one. Now, in terms of the prop bets, Pyfer to win inside the distance is the most likely outcome. The odds are going to be terrible, though I would imagine they are. Yeah, I don't love props on this fight. Maybe go for Pyfer to win in round 2 when Alhassan starts to slow. What are the odds on that? Pyfer in round 2. Yeah, maybe Pyfer in round 2. Like I said, I don't like props. I won't be betting it. But if you like to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, Pyfer by round 2, not a bad bet. Alhassan probably tough enough, well-rounded enough to survive round 1. And then when he slows down in round 2, things will get pretty difficult for him. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the main event on this card, which is going to be King Bobby Green. Is that his nickname these days? I feel like he changes his nickname every 5 minutes. It is King Bobby Green, and he is fighting Grant Dawson, KGD. Don't know what that means. Guessing something Grant Dawson, maybe even King Grant Dawson. I don't know. Don't really care either. Let's take a look at the odds on this one. So we can see Grant Dawson around about the same odds as Joe Pyfer. Call it average odds of around 1.24, which is going to be minus 417 for an implied probability of 81%. And if we take a look at the odds on Bobby Green, he is around an average of 4.30, which is going to be plus 330 for an implied probability of 23%. So Bobby Green, 37 years old, 5'10" with a 71-inch reach. Grant Dawson, 29 years old, 5'10", 72-inch reach. So both guys virtually exactly the same size, but there's an 8-year age gap in this fight, which statistically gives Grant Dawson around about a 70% chance of winning. So that is a strong trend for Bobby Green to be fighting this weekend, and obviously overwhelmingly stacks the odds in Grant Dawson's favour, which is just one of the reasons why Mr. Dawson is a big favourite. Now, Bobby Green is an interesting character because even though we all know him to be a striker, his base is actually wrestling. And his takedown offense is really good. His ground game's really good. And he's the kind of guy that is almost impossible to take down and hold down. That is until you watch his fight against Islam Makhachev, which was a bit of a head scratcher in my opinion, because if you followed Bobby Green's career, you'll know that his defensive wrestling is absolutely superb. It's fucking spectacular. He's extremely difficult to get down, extremely difficult to hold down. Now, I know that Islam Makhachev is the best MMA grappler on the planet right now, or certainly between him and Mr. Khamzat Chimaev. But even though Makhachev, if Chimaev and Makhachev had a baby, they'd be called Makhachev. But anyway, even though Makhachev is the best MMA grappler on the planet, for me, you can always assess someone's level by the skills that they demonstrate, irrespective of whether or not they're able to prevent their opponent from doing what their opponent is trying to do, right? So the Bobby Green performance against Makhachev was a really strange one for me, because even if Makhachev were to overwhelm Bobby Green with grappling in this fight, I would not have expected Bobby Green to look as bad as he did on the ground, because throughout his career his defensive wrestling has been brilliant. Against Makhachev he gave up cheap takedowns and just rolled over and played dead, made life really easy for Makhachev, and just didn't defend himself well on the ground at all. It was one of those fights where I just feel like Green was mentally defeated, didn't really try, took the paycheck, and didn't really show up, if I'm being brutally honest with you. I know Makhachev's incredible, but I also know that Bobby Green's defensive wrestling, takedown defense, ability to work his way back up to his feet, ability to defend himself on the ground is way better than what he showed against Makhachev. Now, was the lackluster performance against Makhachev a sign that Bobby Green's declining and, you know, doesn't have the same athleticism that he did before, which is why he didn't look as scrambly on the ground or as strong and capable of dealing with Makhachev's takedown entries? It's possible he's 37 years old, Father Time's undefeated. You would expect Bobby Green to be declining from fight to fight, especially since he's had 45 pro fights, which is an enormous amount of fights. But the thing that has defined Bobby Green's career is inconsistency, right? At times Bobby Green shows up and looks so good that, you know, you could think that maybe he could fight for a title one day. Of course, I'm not talking about Bobby Green at 37 years old. I'm talking about Bobby Green from 5 years ago. But there was a stage in Green's career where he looked on his day like one of the best lightweights in the world, and then there would be other performances from Green where he just wouldn't show up. He'd just plod forward, allow his opponent to just jab him in the face, no end product. All he would do is trash talk and just let his opponents outpoint him, and it would be a very confusing, frustrating, poor performance from Bobby Green. So inconsistencies have defined his entire career. So whenever we are breaking down a Bobby Green fight, it's always tricky because you never really know what version of him you're going to get. If the Bobby Green that fought Islam Makhachev shows up this weekend, then Grant Dawson is going to be able to drag him to the ground very easily, take his back and do terrible things to him. If Bobby Green's takedown offense and ground game coming into this fight this weekend against Dawson is as bad as it was against Makhachev, then Grant Dawson is going to absolutely dominate Bobby Green, and Green has virtually no chance. What I really like about Grant Dawson is that he's one of these guys that is very, 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 very good at one specific thing. I wouldn't say he necessarily started his career as a specialist. He was a grappler for sure. But Dawson's ability to get the back of his opponent, no matter how they try to defend themselves, is almost Damian Maia-esque. Dawson's ground game reminds me a lot of Damian Maia in the sense that nothing Dawson does on the ground is particularly flashy or fancy. He just sticks to the basics, sticks to the fundamentals, but guys are just not able to stop him. And Damian Maia was exactly the same. He was a very, he wasn't a flashy grappler at all, but he had strong fundamentals, crushing grappling control. He was always one step ahead of his opponents on the ground. And Dawson's ground game reminds me a lot of Damian Maia's. If he gets on top of you, if he gets you back, you're in a lot of trouble. There are issues with Dawson, though, and he is beatable. There's no doubt about it. Dawson's not the best offensive wrestler. Dawson's very good at getting fighters to the ground because he's one of these fighters that commits everything that he's got to the takedown. So Dawson doesn't necessarily use the best technique to get his opponents to the ground, but when he commits to a takedown, he throws everything at them. He's not one of these fighters that will just shoot a half-assed takedown attempt and then retreat as soon as his opponent resists a little bit. Dawson will throw everything into the takedown. He will keep pushing, keep driving until he's exhausted and he can't drive anymore, or until he gets the takedown and achieves his goal. That's what I really like about Dawson. He's very persistent. He goes all in, and I love guys like that. They're the complete opposite of Bobby Green. With guys like Bobby Green, you never know what version of him are going to show up. You never know if they're going to go out there to win. You never know if they're going to perform to the best of their ability. Guys like Dawson will always fight for your money, and you know he's going out there this weekend to commit very hard to takedowns, to try and drag his opponent to the ground in every round and strangle them. You know exactly what you're going to get from him, and I love guys like that, and he's very good at doing it. Dawson's problem, though, is because his offensive wrestling is not the best from a technical point of view, and he relies so much on strength and physicality and power and drive to take his opponents down. He does burn through energy very quickly because he has an inefficient style of grappling. You know, when you'd look at Khabib trying to take his opponents down up against the cage, he would be chaining between all these different kind of takedown attempts, and it would be effortless. Khabib would never look like he was exerting a lot of energy or struggling. When you watch Dawson this weekend, just pay attention to how much energy he exerts when he does shoot a takedown. He throws everything into it, and it's like a car, right? You can't redline a car, for a very long period of time without it running out of gas. And Dawson's exactly the same. Dawson's a strange one because his offensive wrestling is not the best from a technical point of view, but the guy is an absolute master on the ground. Elite grappling control, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. His back control, I think, is the best I've ever seen in the UFC. Never seen a fighter with better back control than Grant Dawson. He's unbelievable, absolutely phenomenal. But I do think a lot of guys in this division with semi-decent takedown defense can cause Grant Dawson problems. And I think Dawson's going to be one of these fighters where he will either dominate you or he will struggle very badly and end up in a really competitive fight. And I don't see there being much middle ground. And in many ways, again, to compare him to Damian Maia's career was a lot like this, right? There would either be fights where Maia would get the takedown and his opponents just couldn't neutralize his grappling and he would just absolutely dominate him on the ground. And then you would get the fights against guys like Ryan LaFleur or Colby Covington or Kamaru Usman, where they would have the defensive wrestling to neutralize the threat of his grappling, and then every fight was a struggle for Damian Maia. I think Dawson's career is likely going to go the same way. He hasn't really ran into that roadblock yet because he's still climbing up the ladder and hasn't faced a particularly high level of opponent, with the exception of Damir Uzmagulov, who is excellent. But I think as Dawson starts to climb up the rankings and face a higher level of opponent, I think he will start to run into some challenges against certain styles of opponent that have good defensive wrestling. Now, is Bobby Green that level? Probably not. You know, if his performance from Makhachev is anything to go by, like I say, most likely outcome here is Dawson's going to be able to drag him to the ground, get to his back, dominate him, do whatever he wants. But throughout Bobby Green's career, his takedown defense has been excellent. And it's been very good because he's very good at staying square to his opponents. He's got good balance, gets underhooks in play very quickly, and it's very, very difficult to get to his back, typically speaking, outside of the Makhachev fight. And we know that Bobby Green's biggest strength throughout his career is his cardio, right? He can go hard for 3 rounds, 5 rounds, 10 rounds, doesn't matter. I don't think I've ever seen Bobby Green even breathing heavy. The guy is a cardio machine. And we do know that the longer the fight goes, the more Grant Dawson slows. And this is a 5-round fight. Now, the rate at which Dawson slows really depends on just one thing. How hard you make him commit to takedowns, or how much energy you make him exert getting takedowns. If he has a fight like he did against Jared Gordon or Damir Ismagulov, where he's able to get the takedowns, get to his back, get to their back pretty easily, then Dawson's not going to slow down very much at all, because he doesn't have to burn through a lot of energy to obtain dominant positions. So in the 3rd round, 4th round, 5th round, Dawson will look just fine. But if you make him work hard for takedowns, work hard to scramble, make him strike a bit, fight for position, like Rick Glenn did, that's when you can start to see Dawson really, really struggle. Now, what I will say about that, though, the only caveat to that is that Dawson is making big improvements since he moved to ATT. So Dawson's been improving exponentially since he ditched James Krause, or perhaps he was forced to ditch James Krause and then go to train at American Top Team. Dawson is like 10 times the fighter he was since he was training under Krause. ATT have done an amazing job with him. So this is one of those fights where stylistically it's a good matchup for Dawson based on the Bobby Green Makhachev fight. But I also think in many ways it's a dangerous fight for Dawson, because even if he is able to get Bobby Green down and rack up a lot of grappling control early, this is a 5-rounder, and we have seen Dawson gas on a decent amount of occasions in the past. And so if Bobby Green can survive those grappling positions early, drag Dawson into the 3rd, 4th and 5th round, Dawson may be too tired to get the takedowns, and that's where this fight gets real interesting. So I actually think this matchup is a lot more interesting than the odds suggest, and potentially could be a lot more competitive than the odds suggest. And I wouldn't write Bobby Green out here, or off here even. Would I bet Bobby Green this weekend? Absolutely not. You'd be a fool to bet Bobby Green with how bad he looked on the ground against Makhachev. But if Green can stay alive in the fight early, drag Dawson into deep waters, with this being a 5-rounder, I think it can get very, very interesting in the later rounds. How often have we seen Bobby Green in fights where he struggled really bad early on and then taken over in the second half of the fight and looked pretty good? When that happens, Green usually ends up losing a split decision because he wins the 3rd dominantly and just lets the first 2 rounds slip. But maybe a 5-rounder is perfect for Green's style, and we haven't seen him in many 5-rounders in his career because, you know, he's never really been in that main event picture before, with the exception of the Makhachev fight. And so, you know, it's an interesting matchup. I'm looking forward to it. Dawson's most likely to win, but his advantage is very much baked into the odds. Not much upside in betting Dawson in this odds range. In terms of Bobby Green, you know, impossible to bet him based on the Makhachev fight. But let me know what you think. It is a good matchup. Do you think it could get interesting? I'm going to be passing on this one though. In terms of the over-under on this fight, it is a tricky one because I feel, well, it's a tricky one because we don't know what version of Bobby Green we're going to get, right? If the version of Bobby Green shows up that we've seen throughout the majority of his career with good defensive wrestling, good takedown defense, good submission defense, then I think it's pretty likely this fight will go very deep. And I'd actually love the over 2.5 rounds. I'd actually consider betting on this fight to go to a decision. But if the version of Bobby Green shows up the foot Makhachev, I think he'll be lucky to make it out of the first round because I think Dawson could get him down easily, get his back and choke him out pretty quickly. So without knowing what version of Bobby Green we're going to get, very difficult to bet the over or the under, and for that reason I'm going to pass. Now in terms of prop bets on this one, you guys know me, I'm not the biggest fan of props, so I like to go for the long shots instead. If I were going to take a prop on this fight, I would go with something crazy like Green to win by decision at 11.0 plus 1,000. It's not the most likely outcome, but with bets such as this, you don't need to have a particularly high win rate to make a profit long term. And I could actually see it happening. I could see Green staying alive, weathering the early storm, dragging Dawson into deep waters, into the fifth round where Dawson's too tired to get the takedowns and then takes over and backdoors a decision. I could see it happening. I'm not going to be betting it myself, but to make watching the fight a bit more interesting, if you want to place some bets on this one, Green by decision isn't terrible. I don't hate it. So, I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for watching. If you did, please hit the like button below. It would mean a lot. Really appreciate it. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com. Link in the description below. And subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be back next week with another breakdown video. So have a great week. Hope you make loads of money on Saturday. Hopefully, Mr. Buckley comes through for us. If not, it is Warriors, can't win them all. But take care, everyone. Love you all. Have a great week. Nice one. Bye.